vote for any of the candidates because you never know. You know, even Randy, who knew for sure whether he would get voted in, even though he was on the ballot. But thankfully he was. But Manny Pacquiao, if someone didn't vote for Manny Pacquiao, we should know about it. Their vote should be taken away. Now,
I totally agree with that.
Hypothetically, Frank, someone is entitled to vote for whoever they want that's on the ballot. And you can't really take their vote away. But logically speaking, what kind of idiot wouldn't vote for Manny Pacquiao unless they, you know, listen to certain rumors about him that I'm not going to get into at all. Okay, but so Manny Pacquiao is a no-brainer. You know, got in easily.
Anybody who didn't vote for him, Jack, should not be allowed to vote. I think it's that clear. I know you're a little bit nicer than I am, but I just think there are some things where, yeah, things are based on opinion, but sometimes, you know what? Your opinion can be wrong, and there's no argument to vote against Manny Pacquiao. Not one, including the rumors.
I'm a big believer. You can always make an argument, as crazy as it seems. I'll give you an example. I used to be a voting member when they had at the Las Vegas Boxing Hall of Fame. The late Steve Lott, a great, great guy. He was the president. I was on his voting committee.
Right.
And we were privy, all of us, to see how the others voted. We shared the emails, you know, across the country. We saw how each of us voted. And one person, I don't even remember his name, he left out Sugar Ray Robinson and, you know, the beginning class, and he voted for Jess Willard. Now, you're going to immediately say, no, this guy, take his vote away. How can you vote for Jess Willard, not Sugar Ray Robinson? If I'm going to make an argument for this guy, I'll say, well, heavyweight champions always have more worldwide fame. You know, as great as Robinson was, at that time, a heavyweight champion would be more famous around the world. One. Number two, a heavyweight champion beats Robinson more likely than not in a head-to-head competition. So there's nothing artificial about his title. I'm playing devil's advocate now, Frank. This isn't what I believe. But if I had to present an argument, you know, and
that's the case you'd make.
That's the case. If you're a hardcore boxing fan, it's not the greatest case. I know that. But if I threw it at you, well, a heavyweight champion normally, they would have all beaten Sugar Ray Robinson if I threw that argument to you. Even though I don't think he would have beaten Jess Willard, to be honest. I think he would have beaten Jess Willard, I mean.
Robinson?
Yeah.
In the ring?
Yeah.
Oh, Jack, you floor me. Come on, he couldn't tickle Jess Willard.
Too quick. It would be a repeat of Roy Jones and John Ruiz.
No. Robinson would have to run the whole. If Robinson lasted, it's because he ran. He could never fight.
I'll give you another example. David Hay gave away 100 pounds to Nikolai Valuev. He outpointed him, moved around him. Keep that in mind.
David Hay is not 1/10 of Ray Robinson, and Valuev is worse than Willard.
Okay, but that's that. But a couple of other names. Michael Nunn, Hall of Fame or not?
Jack, I went back and I looked at this record, and, you know, I don't have a problem with Michael Nunn. First of all, he was gifted. He could box. And then if you look at his resume, who he beat, I mean, even the Tony fight, which most people remember for, he was taking it to Tony and winning that fight easily before he got caught. So Michael Nunn, based on accomplishment, peak, and resume, I don't have a problem with Michael Nunn being in there. I might not have said that a few years ago, but after looking at it more closely, no problem with Michael Nunn being in there.
At one point, correct me if I'm wrong, Michael Nunn may have been considered the best pound for pound in the world. Or
he was in the conversation, yes.
The most fierce guy to fight, not because of his power, because he had this miserable style that could shut an opponent down. But the thing is, he wasn't the most exciting opponent. Kevin Monahan of NBC came up with one of the funny lines saying condemned prisoners should be forced to watch Michael Nunn fight. Could you imagine Michael Nunn boxing, and if someone's supposed to be put in solitary confinement, they make him stop and watch the fight, and he has to be glued to the TV the whole
I
time.
wouldn't be that mad if it was me, in
Yeah,
all honesty. But
yeah,
Jack, that shot he landed on Callum Bay
yeah.
was heard around the world. What a shot that was. And there was no doubt in my mind that fight was going to go the distance. And he just leveled him. You heard that around the arena. A thud, like I can still hear it, and that was it.
But you know what I think part of okay, so you remember that fight, and you would say Colombi was his defining fight. But when you when you talk about defining fights, you want to hear like a legendary fight, great fighters, like what they did exactly. I mean,
Well, Callum Bay was one of the best boxers of that era.
right, but Colombi wasn't a name that's really remembered now in America that much unless you're a hardcore fight fan. He doesn't come up in conversation. Colombi himself, some people feel he should be in the Hall of Fame. Okay? Because Colombi did beat Mike McCallum. He handled him his first loss. Then McCallum won a close decision in the rematch. This next pick is controversial. And I'm happy for him that he got in because there's a lot about him I admire. But it's pretty controversial. Vinny Paz.
No Hall of Famer. Tough guy, determined. Give me his Hall of Fame wins, Jack. Give me a half decent Hall of Fame fighter he beat.
Let me play devil's advocate again. You said the words Hall of Fame. Was he one of the better known boxers of his era?
I don't think so.
No, you don't think Vinny Paz?
Maybe just to me. He never held my attention that much, so I could be a little off on that.
Let me throw it another thing at you. Have you ever seen a fighter, not equally as, but more tenacious than Vinny Paz?
No, I'll give him that. Tough guy.
Tenacity. John Scully would say, you hear about fighters saying they're willing to die in the ring. And John Scully said, I would say that too, but I never really was willing to die in the ring. He thought Vinny Paz was a one guy crazy enough who says he's willing to die in the ring, who really was willing, and let me throw.
Well, Tex Cobb was too, and I'm not putting him in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, but Tex Cobb didn't have the offensive attack.
No.
To mix up. Vinny Paz too. Let me throw this at you, playing devil's advocate again. We hear about boxers and athletes coming back from injuries and making a comeback. Name an athlete who made a greater comeback from, such a gruesome injury as Vinny Paz. Think of that. That's incredible, the way he was able to come back from that.
Jack, there's no doubt about that. But I mean, all right, so let's put him in the Hall of Fame for toughness.
No. But I'm saying Vinny Paz had a long career, but he did come up a little short in the big fights. I mean, he was competitive with Roger Mayweather, but he clearly lost the fight. Competitive with Hector Camacho, but he did lose the fight.
Got a gift against Iran one of the times they fought.
No, I think he earned the decision. No, I don't think it was a gift, Frank. I think he earned both decisions. He got knocked down in the first fight. Duran was past his peak. But
I'm thinking of Duran and Camacho. I'm sorry.
You're thinking of, maybe Greg Hagen and him had 3 fights. Paz won a controversial decision in the first. Could have gone either way. Hagen clearly won the second. Paz clearly won the rubber match.
Hagen won the first fight. Paz won the second.
No. They had 3 fights. 3 fights.
I said Hagen won the first fight. Paz won the second and the third.
No. Paz won the first one in Rhode Island. Hagen won the second. I was there in Atlantic City.
Jack, I'm looking at the record. He lost to Hagen the first. No. Correct. Boy, my eyes must be bad. Hagen, right. I'm looking at the different record. Okay. Hagen won Paz won the first fight. Hagen won the rematch.
A lot of people Hagen won the first fight. Okay.
I was one of them.
Okay, but but it was close. But maybe more people feel Hogan won the fight than thought Paz won the second fight. Hogan won clearly.
Is
And
Pazienza a better fighter than Mancini?
oh, what a fight that would have been!
At lightweight, it would have been a great fight.
Oh man, and you put Paz against Arturo Gatti too.
Another one. But again though, Jack, Gaddy's in, and I don't think he belongs. But because of his persona, like Paz, they get in. And I'm sorry, that's part of it. That's just not my voting.
Yeah, well, I had. I don't know how friendly Owen Ben Dowdy from England. He was dead set against Ricky Hatton getting in. And I felt at the time, well, Hatton was famous in his part of the world, but he likes to go strictly Ben Dowdy on accomplishments in the ring. I feel they're intangibles outside of the ring. Let's say a fighter's from a certain country, and he's the most famous fighter in the history of that country. But if he were American, he wouldn't quite have the credentials to get in the Hall of Fame. I don't have a big problem with him getting in the Hall of Fame then, because it's called Hall of Fame.
So famous, you're taking the famous.
It's not called Hall of Accomplishments. And look, Frank, you're a baseball fan.
Not really.
Okay, but I'm going to give you an example. They just announced a couple of players to get in. Dave Parker's getting in one of them. Dave Parker was outstanding in his prime. Don't get me wrong, but to me, he's closer to the Hall of the Very Good over his whole career. At his peak, he was great. But in all sports, it's like the Hall of the Very Good guys getting in. You're from the Philadelphia area. You're familiar with Scott Rowland?
Yep.
He was a third baseman for the Phillies and the Cardinals. And he got in the Hall of Fame a few years ago. He was never a great player. He was a very, very good player.
I never thought of Roland as being a Hall of Famer, but I will say this. When Dave Parker was announced, and my memory going back to that era, the late 70s, when I did follow baseball, my initial reaction was I was not surprised that Parker made the cut. And wasn't he a two-time MVP?
Yeah, okay. I mean, I think it's a matter of opinion, but I want to go into a couple of other names. Kenny Bayless got in as a ref. I've got to look at Kenny Bayless's record again. I know he's had a lot of big, high-profile fights. I mean, one old-timer ref, his name slips under the radar, Johnny Lobianco. Johnny Lobianco. If you look at the guy's record, the amount of big-time fights he refereed, no matter what you think of him as a referee, good or not good, I'm not going to argue with someone that point if they didn't vote for him. But my thing is, look at all the big fights he handled. I mean, the same thing I think down the line.
But wasn't he more New York-based, Jack Lobianco?
But that's where all the big fights were.
That's true.
I mean,
that's true.
Yeah, and Kenny Bayless, I'd have to analyze a lot more, whether he belongs in, doesn't belong. And I don't want to say he doesn't, I'm willing to accept it. And I don't know him, but if I bumped into him, I'd certainly congratulate him. And I wouldn't think he's unworthy, but I'm just not really sure. And Ross Greenberg of HBO. I guess Ross is worthy for what he's done on HBO and behind the scenes. But
HBO put a lot of big fights on back in the late 70s and early 80s and helped the sport evolve as far as mainstream.
Right. And one of the people who got in posthumously, and it warmed my heart, even though some people don't feel he belongs in, to me, he's a Hall of Famer, Al Gavin. Okay?
You have to be an insider to know his contributions, though.
Let me tell you how we talk about real boxing guys, okay? Before the internet came into existence, the only information recognition fighters were basically getting, and I'm not talking about famous world champions, would be maybe they could get a line in a newspaper once in a while or something like that. No, I wrote then, and I still do for this weekly publication, Boxing News, where I would have covered the club shows. And I would oftentimes be the only reporter there. And if I had someone else with me, it would be Jack Obermeyer and Jeff Jower, two legendary guys, We'd be the only ones there. And Al Gavin subscribed to Boxing News. He would cut out, this is why he's dear to my heart, He would cut out the stories, me covering the shows, make copies, and give them to the 6th-round fighters. And I was astonished they would.
I didn't know that.
Something written, because he was a real boxing guy, Al Gavin. He was Lennox Lewis's cut man. He was Kevin Kelly's cut man. He was in a lot of corners. Emmanuel Stewart used him, and Ralph, Ralph Citrose, and he was.
Well, he had that big encyclopedia that he published.
Right before we have
the internet.
Box Rec. John Shepard, I hope gets in the Hall of Fame someday. He's been on the ballot. He hasn't gotten the votes. If I were John Shepard, I wouldn't do it. Because imagine he said, I'm doing away with Box Rec. Do you know how many people would be screwed in the business?
Yep. That's their fault. I mean, and there's a lot on Box Rec that's not updated, and there's some that is inaccurate, but that is the standby go-to. It's the Wikipedia of boxing, basically.
Yeah, but in the past we'd have the Ring Record book, but it would come out once a year, and if you're looking at 8 months later, it would be outdated for the time being. Oh, you know who I gave a call to after the Hall of Fame? Inductees came out this week, but we played phone tag. I wanted to get Russell Peltz's reaction, because he's been a big advocate for Rodrigo Valdez getting in. Now, part of it is this. Rodrigo Valdez fought his pride and joy, Benny Briscoe, 3 times. Benny was a heck of a fighter. You'd know better than I would, being a Philadelphia guy. But Valdez beat him all 3 times. And he's the only guy that stopped Briscoe in Briscoe's long career. And
he dropped Monzon.
And lost 2 relatively close
fights.
Yeah.
Russell's case is, if you beat Benny Briscoe 3 times, 3 out of 3, and you go tooth and nail with Monzon twice and drop him, that does it. And you know what, Jack? I agree with Russell on that. If there was no Monzon at that era and during that era, he probably would have been the best middleweight, just like I've always said. If there was no Duran, Esteban de Jesus might have had a case of being the alpha lightweight. So
what would have happened? The big fight would have been Ken Buchanan against Esteban de Jesus, which
would have been a great fight, Jack.
Because of Duran, they would have been the equivalent, Buchanan and de Jesus, of Emil Griffith and Louis Rodriguez. I think you would have
had point.
Yes, series. But Rodrigo Valdez got in, and Russell's been complaining for years about it.
Was he on the ballot?
He was on the ballot, yeah. He was on there. Yeah, absolutely. And yours truly finally came around and voted for him. I didn't vote for him for a number of years, if I'm going to come clean, but I did vote for him this past year. So sometimes certain fighters you got to make a case for. Some are no-brainers, and things change year to year. But certain
Jack,
guys,
let me ask you this, and I've thought about this. What middleweight, genuine middleweight, did Marvin Hagler fight and defeat who was Rodrigo Valdez's equal? Not counting Hearns and not counting Leonard. I'm talking about guys that were bona fide, full-fledged middleweights. Did Hagler fight a middleweight as good as Valdez? I'm going to answer before you do, and the answer to that is no.
Alan Minter was a heck of a fighter. I could argue that Minter would have beaten Valdez, perhaps. It would have been a close fight, I think. I'll be honest, Minter at his best. Mustafa Hamsho going head-to-head against Valdez using his dirty tactics.
I'll take
It's gonna-
Valdez every day of the week. If Valdez can handle Briscoe, he can handle Mustafa Hamsho.
I would think so. And my guy, Vito Antuofermo, who would keep fighting Valdez every inch of the way.
Valdez would outbox him, Jack. That's all. He wouldn't knock him out. He'd outbox him.
But it would be a tough fight, very tough fight. Vito would be throwing a lot of punches. The Vito that showed up against Marvin Hagler. Okay, I mean, how many? I can make this argument. How many middleweights in boxing history could have fought Hagler as closely as Vito did, as tooth and nail as Vito did for the.
Vito had a hell of a night that night, Jack. There's no doubt about that.
For the full 15 rounds, never really got hurt, and Hagler threw the kitchen sink at him. You can argue. Okay, you could argue Hagler won the fight 9-6 if you want. Fine.
That's a fair point.
I won't beef, but think of it. Vito then won 6 rounds against Hagler, who didn't want to give him an inch and was never hurt and was going toe-to-toe with him till the final bell. I mean, how many fighters in boxing history, would have done that against Marcus?
Jack, you could say that. Maybe he matched up because he was aggressive and rugged and tough with Hagler. But I just think that if we polled, not that it means anything, but if we polled most of the people who hold an opinion that we value, and we said, okay, Valdez is fighting Mustafa Hamsho or Vito Antuofermo, who's the favorite going in? I don't think anybody would say that Valdez would be an underdog to Hamsho or Antuofermo.
Odds makers Valdez against Antuofermo would have Valdez only as a 7 or 8 to 5 favorite. They wouldn't.
That's what I thought about it. 8 to 5, yeah, almost 2 to 1.
Yeah.
But Jack, will you admit that Vito is not going to knock Valdez out?
No,
because Benny couldn't and Monzon couldn't. Okay, so if he can't knock him out, then he has to outbox him, and I'm just not confident that he can do that.
Yeah, I see. You make a good point. I also want to point out, great referee from England, Harry Gibbs, finally got in. And, we've had other referees get in the Hall of Fame, but, Harry Gibbs finally, got his due.
And in a lot of fights that he was the referee, he was the sole voice and had the sole score. Hey, Randy, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, Randy.
Thanks for checking in. Yes, you're right. Mugabe gave Hagler a war.
I hope you didn't come in too late, Randy. We're done talking about you. John Mugabe gave Hagler a war. Yeah, good point. Mugabe
a junior middleweight.
He would have been a handful for Valdez. Randy makes a good point.
He would have been a handful for Valdez, no doubt, but I don't think he beats him.
Okay, so I just want to finish up the inductees. Owen Swift.
Well, Jack, wait a second. Before you run away with everything, let's clear the field on one thing. If you take off the names Leonard and Hearns, Valdez was greater than any middleweight Marvin Hagler fought.
Okay.
If you take Leonard and Hearns off Hagler's resume, Valdez is right there with Hagler in a fight that probably goes a distance. He probably loses, but the fact is Valdez was as good or better than any full-fledged natural middleweight Marvin Hagler fought, is my point.
Valdez was outstanding, okay? I mean, if I have to compare him to someone in like another division, we talked a little while ago about Esteban de Jesus at his best. They were about on the par. Esteban de Jesus' problem was Roberto Duran, finally. He beat him, but he beat Duran. He beat Duran.
Just like Valdez could not beat Monzon, but Monzon's one of the GOATs.
Right, exactly. And
Jack, the fight I fantasized about as far as one of those fantasy fights, who wins? I have one for you. Rodrigo Valdez against Dick Tiger.
Wow.
Hard to make an overwhelming case for either one of those guys.
Let me tell you something, Frank. You're the same guy. You're full of it. Now you're building up Dick Tiger, but when we were talking about Bob Foster, you'd say, well, who did he beat? And I'd say Dick Tiger.
Dick Tiger was a small middleweight, Jack. Bob Foster was a giant. I'm not going to kill him for that.
A small middleweight who moved up in weight and beat Jose Torres twice. He beat Roger
He was
Rousey,
167
Frankie
pounds when
Vaccaro.
he
He
fought
beat
Bob Foster. Jack,
Randy.
he was 167 or 168. He was 37 years old. He was at the end of the road. He's not going to beat Bob Foster. That wasn't prime Tiger. And even if it was, he was not. He was not going to beat a full-fledged all-time great middleweight or light heavyweight. And Valdez would not have defeated Bob Foster either.
Yes, some fighters are freaks in nature. And I'm going to get to, one fought this past weekend. Let me just finish up with the Hall of Fame. A number of women got in, and I have a vote with the women, and I don't know whether I'm comfortable voting on them because I'll look things up, and you kind of, and the thing about it too, a number of them aren't well known, and I had, I think, 4 women getting in this year, and then I think of certain of the men, like a Jerry Quarry, who's not in the Hall of Fame, and certain of the women who are in the Hall of Fame. Now I'm going to be considered, oh, he's a male chauvinist. Why is he singling out women? But we're talking boxing here. It's not the woman's fault that there's not nearly the competition.
It's not deep.
The men's. It's not deep. And to get into the Hall of Fame, the amount who get in. Look, listen, a Katie Taylor absolutely should be in the Hall of Fame when her time comes, more so than a number of men, okay? Maybe Amanda Serrano, too, who's a bit of a pioneer in her own way. I can understand the Ann Wolf, but she didn't fight a lot, but she worked.
Kathy Collins got in.
Kathy Collins, did she get in the International Boxing Hall of Fame?
Oh, maybe I'm thinking just New York.
Yeah,
you might be right.
New York. Now, listen, Frank, I don't
But
mind.
she was a pioneer, too.
No, but I don't mind regional Hall of Fames. That's okay. But when you talk about the International Hall of Fame,
Okay.
bothers me. Before we move on to the fights, congratulations to all the Hall of Fames. I hope Randy heard what we said about him before. If not, he could Google YouTube after the show, and I'm sure he could find the beginning of the show. Congratulations, Randy, Frank, and myself.
I sent him a text, and I told him, well-earned and well-deserved. And it's like, I just think that sums it up.
Yeah,
and his let's face it, Jack, and Randy, if you're still listening, you just have a passion that I know that I had at one time, but I'll admit, and I'm just speaking for me, and I can even speak for Peltz on this one, it doesn't burn like it did before. And I think in your case, Randy, it still burns like it did.
If you had to say the number one fan, I'm the number one advocate of all time in the sport, this would be a dream matchup. Randy against Harold Letterman. What a matchup.
Jack, I don't know Harold Letterman like that, so I'm going to go by what you say.
Randy loved Harold Letterman. It would be a 6-5 pick-em match. Who loves boxing the most? Those guys, but they're in a class, they're in a class in themselves. Congratulations, Randy. Well deserved.
And Jack, here's the test. Randy could tell you about, let's just take the Usyk Fury rematch coming up in 2 weeks, okay? He'll watch it and he'll know everything and be able to recall what happened to complete undercard. I will not be able to do that unless somebody's saying, Frank, I'm going to need you to talk about the semi or the prelims before that. But he'll know that. He'll be able to say their names. He'll know their records. And he'll be able to give you detail. Where myself, as of late, the last 2 fights I can go in depth about.
But let's go in depth about this past weekend's fights. I covered a doubleheader for Boxing News. Things are covered now by reporters. Not so much a ringside the way it used to be, unless it's in your city, because they're not going to fly you somewhere. You're not going to go. But there's a doubleheader in Phoenix, 2 rematches. Emmanuel Navarrete against Oscar Valdez. like I've told you on past shows, Emmanuel Navarrete's one of my favorite fighters. I love Emmanuel Navarrete, but his last two fights, a draw, okay, against Robinson Canseco, and then he lost to Dennis Berinchik, close decision, moving up in weight to lightweight. He went back down to junior lightweight. He looked like his old self. He looked fantastic, Emmanuel Navarrete. He was bouncing in and out. He was so fluid. The jabs were coming. He's a volume puncher. Poor Oscar Valdez, who were, at one time they were trying to build him up to be a major star. And Valdez, no one has more of a heart than Oscar Valdez. No one. And he gave it all he had. He was overwhelmed until he was knocked out with a body shot in the 6th round, was knocked down twice along the way. And I hate to say it, Oscar Valdez now with that loss, I hate to use the term for a guy like Oscar Valdez. He's more a gatekeeper now. I mean, I can't call him a serious contender because this was his chance after losing a decision to Navarrete a year ago, saying he'll make the adjustments. It just
He's not a fighter. That's not who he is, though.
Yeah,
he's not a fighter that can really tweak a whole lot. He's got to be a volume puncher and be able to overwhelm you. And when he can't get in on you, and granted, I didn't see the fights. I was in a wedding Saturday, but I did see the highlight of that fight, and it just looked to me like he just couldn't get in or get anything done. And the price he had to pay to try to get in was too high.
Yeah, but the big story of the night was Rafael Espinoza defending his WBO featherweight title against two-time Olympic gold medalist Robozy Ramirez. And Ramirez, he's won titles, but he hasn't turned out to be the star they hoped he was. He beat Shakur Stevenson for the gold medal, for second of the 2 gold medals. And last time they fought, it was a grueling fight. Espinoza won at the end of the fight. He knocked down Ramirez, pulled out a close decision. Espinoza had a 7-inch height advantage. Talk about a freak of nature. You mentioned Bob Foster. This guy stands 6'1" as a featherweight. Talk about
That's
freak
amazing.
of nature. Talk about a freak of nature. Okay, but the thing about it is too. So Ramirez is very coy, trying to box from the outside, getting down low the way Roy Jones does in that kind of stance that Roy Jones does. And Espinoza starts picking up the pace. At the end of 5 rounds, Ramirez is up 48-47 on 2 of the cards. He's actually ahead on 2 of the cards. And then Espinoza, 12 seconds, it ends into round 6, shockingly. He hits him a straight left to the eye, a straight right to the eye. I don't remember which hand. And Ramirez all of a sudden waves his hand the way Duran did against Leonard. No mas. And it's like over. And he took a good shot in the eye, don't get me wrong. But Joe Tessitore mentioned it best, after he has every right to pull himself out of the fight. Any fighter has an absolute right, because a lot of times the doctors won't do it, their corner won't do it. I'm not against the fighter looking out for themselves. But if you really want to dare to be great, you are going to push it to the limits. How far you're willing to go. I never condemn a fighter who's not willing to push it to the limit. So there had to be a point after 5 rounds, Frank. Ramirez must have thought, I'm not going to beat this guy, or he remembered the last fight and he didn't want to put himself through hell the last 7 rounds.
Without seeing the fight, based on what you've conveyed, I would agree with that's probably what happened. But Jack, the point, just remember this though. That is what separates the greats from the near greats. And that's why not everybody is great, and that's why there are near greats, outstanding fighters, but that part where they can just go, just like Ali and Manila, they can just find that one more gear and go. That's why we revere these guys, and they're legends, because not everybody can do that.
Yeah, but you know what? The public becomes unforgiving, Frank. If a fighter quits in a corner sometimes, it's more acceptable than him quitting during a round. A lot, I was watching a tape, as you know, I'm writing a book on Michael Spinks, and I was watching his fight with Stefan
Never
Tang.
heard of him.
So I used to spar them a number of times. Stefan Tangstead, okay?
Right.
And I didn't recall the fight, but I had to watch the tape of it again, study it out. And when it came time, Tankstead was knocked down. Richard Steele would ask him, "Do you want to continue?" First up, a referee should never ask a fight if you want to continue,
Yeah.
because he's
He
putting
puts him
the
in a
fight
bad spot.
in a very bad spot, because fighters are trained to be valiant. They don't want
Right.
to say no. That they rather be pulled out and then act like, "Oh, I wanted to go on, but the ref pulled me out." Let them save their dignity. Tankstead mumbled like he didn't want. That's enough. Very mumbled in an audible way, because it was the second time he was knocked down. The first time he didn't want to give in and say that's enough, even though you sensed he wanted the fight stop. But with Hammer Ramirez, there was no warning. If I was a referee, Frank, it never would have crossed my mind to stop the fight. That's the thing. That's what was so shocking about it.
It's funny how people will they'll call a guy like that. They'll come down on him for quitting. Let me ask you this. Did George Chuvalo quit against Joe Frazier?
Great point. That crossed my mind, Frank. Fantastic point. What happened, it happened suddenly. He took a shot in the eye, Chuvalo. That's the worst place to get hit, I think. Right squarely in the eye.
Frazier broke his eye socket, which he said was from the fight before.
But you want to know something, Frank? If someone waved it was all over, and then we found out their eye socket was broken, I think even the people that booed maybe would be forgiving afterwards if they.
Well, that happened to Cal Brook twice.
Yeah. Okay. Or like with Jerry Quarry and Joe Frazier, the second fight. Quarry had enough. At one point, he waved to Joe Louis enough. That's fair. Or Carlos Ortiz at the end of 6 rounds against Ken Buchanan. It broke my heart to hear the Garden crowd boo him because he retired on a stool. But Ortiz said, "I was exhausted. I was scared I'd get hurt. I didn't want to get knocked out. I was scared I would get hurt." To me, that's good enough.
And Jack, what's good enough for me is if the fighter in question can go home and look himself in the mirror that night and say, "I did the best I could. There was nothing left to give, and it wouldn't change the outcome." Just like when I went to see Aguayo and Pryor fight the rematch, and I watched Aguayo sit there, and the referee counted him out, and my buddy just said, "He's this, that, or the other. He quit." And I, you've heard me say this countless times. I said he didn't quit. I said he lost his 1%. That 1% belief he had that he could still pull the fight out. And at that point, when Pryor sat Aguayo down the second time in the fight, or maybe it was the third, I'm not sure, but Pryor realized if I get up, he will only put me back here again. And maybe if he keeps putting me here, I'm going to get hurt really bad. I've given it my best. There's nothing more to give. He's the better man. I have no problem with that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100% that point. There were a couple other fights. Richardson Hitchens beat Liam Parrow. Okay,
that was on the ESPN card.
Welterweight bout. No, that was on the Zone. That was from Puerto Rico. The 2 fights I mentioned, Navarrete Valdez and Espinosa Ramirez, doubleheader, which is very nice doubleheader by, even though they're both rematches they fought before. That was a nice, double dip with that. And Hitchinson, I just saw the highlights of that, a few of the rounds. And Hitchinson, he came up fighting for the PBC, fighter from Brooklyn. He looked good beating Liam Parrow, who beat Sergio Mateus, in a little bit of an upset. before that. And then there was a fight, a couple of old war horses. Now, Frank, you're going to have to look it up whether the ring announcer was legitimate in what he said. He said it was for the WBA heavyweight title. I can't believe, now Kurbet Pulev is a world champion. Come on. Don't tell me the winner, Fury Usyk, will have an excuse not to have the rubber match. If it's Fury or if it's Usyk, instead of fighting Daniel Dubois again, if it's Usyk, he says, oh no, I got to fight Pulev. I want to unify the titles. He fought Manuel Shaw. But I will say this for the two old war horses. They went at it, Frank. It was a
Good fight.
Good fight. 12 rounds, full distance. It was in Bulgaria. Pulev is a national hero there, which is interesting point that I made before about the Hall of Fame. I'd never vote for him for the Hall of Fame, but in Bulgaria, he's a national hero. So if I was going to make an argument for his name ever getting on the ballot, that would be it. In his country, he's a superstar.
Someday, Jack, though, well, no, maybe not, because it's probably been tried, but like to define what a Hall of Famer is, because it's different to everybody.
You just put an idea in my head, Frank. It's probably came up before. Why don't we have a World Cup in boxing? The best fight in a weight class, a particular weight class from a number of countries, get 16 countries and have the tournament, the World Cup. Heavyweights would be the best thing. Everyone comes out with their best heavyweight. Every country. Some guys would have very little to no chance, but it might be a little fun.
And Jack, speaking of that, and I've touched on this before. Next weekend, we're going to preview the Fury Usyk fight in depth. And again, I've been thinking there's a lot more on the line in that fight than just the rematch. I actually believe the winner of that fight will lay claim to being the best heavyweight of the post-Klitschko era, which encompasses the last 9.5 years. And if Fury wins, it has to go to him because he will have defeated everybody. He will have held the title the longest. And I just think that if he wins that, it'll show us two things, that he really was the best guy, and the fact that we've never seen him coming off a loss going into a major fight. And I am very, very encapsulated by how he handles that. How will he react to that? Because I hear he's going to come in light. I hear he's going to come in heavy. How does he go against that scenario with a guy who proved he could knock him out, the guy could hurt him, had quicker hands, and is the better technician? I want to see how Fury adjusts to that. And Jack, if he wins, he's got to get the props.
Frank, I think you're the only one who thinks post-Klitschko era. Maybe they're thinking of their legacy. I get the feeling, believe it or not, Fury's maybe thinking more of his legacy than Usyk is. I think Usyk has such tunnel vision to win the fight. He's not distracted by, oh, what's my legacy going to be? He's so focused on just winning the fight and doing what he has.
Jack, I agree with that, but I still think that argument is out there because if we go back, we had the 60s and 70s. We had Ali, Foreman, and Frazier. The 80s.
You say post.
The 80s, we had Tyson and Holmes. The 90s, we had Lewis, Bowe, Holyfield. And then we had, after Lennox Lewis retired in 2003, the Klitschko's owned the division from 2004 to 2015. Well, now we're 10 years out from that. Who's the best post-Klitschko heavyweight will be decided. Yes, there's more on the line, but I think, Jack, when you're the best heavyweight of your era, everybody considers you an all-time great. Name an era where the best heavyweight of that era didn't go down as a great.
Okay, you open up this for conversation, okay? And your opinion is probably the same as mine. But there are rumors out there, and you get the feeling there's some validity to it because he's really been thinking about it. Klitschko coming back. And part of his motivation, a large part, he wants another go at Fury, who he doesn't like personally, who he kind of wants to set the record straight with. I think he's too far gone. I thought he was past his peak before he lost to Fury. Seeing him outpoint
I agree.
things at the Garden. But if Klitschko came back, he'd never fight Usyk, his countryman, who he's fond of. But if he came back and if Fury beat Usyk, and if Klitschko came back and beat Fury and regained the title at an old age, does that maybe make him a top 5 heavyweight of all time, number 5, considering he had some like 20 title defenses?
I don't know about that, Jack, but I know one thing. It bodes real well for him historically. As some of the old timers won't want to hear that, but it will. But Jack, I can't see that happen. I know he wants to break Foreman's record. I can't see that happening. I can't see him beating Fury now. He's too far. Think about this. He lost to Joshua 8 years ago. Hasn't fought since. His body still looks good and he stays in shape, but we both know that means nothing. That's a mirage.
Yeah, I know. I agree. You posted, speaking of heavyweights, this story I got a kick out of. If you could tell us when you were waiting at Joe Frazier's gym with Tex Cobb. Why don't you, for the people who didn't see the post, I kind of like that story.
All right, it's a couple of weeks after Tex Cobb beats a journeyman at the Spectrum named Zach Ferguson. Frazier's gym usually opened around 12 o'clock in the afternoon. But, some of us would get there early, 11:30, quarter of 12. So it's myself, Charles Singleton, and Cobb. It's about 20 of 12. We're waiting for George Benton to come in. Charles Singleton and I are sitting on the ring steps talking, and Tex Cobb is getting antsy. He's throwing punches in the air. He's throwing round kicks. And all of a sudden, he sees the big heavy bag at the gym, and he goes in and he starts whacking it with head-level round kicks with pointy cowboy boots on. Well, Joe Frazier, who was not there that often, comes stumbling in, not stumble, but just, strutting in, sunglasses, suit, briefcase. Hello, gentlemen, what it looked like. As he's walking up to his office, to the left, he sees Tex Cobb kicking the bag. And he goes, Big Tex, he goes, what are you doing? He goes, you're kicking my bag, you're going to rip it. And real calmly, Tex goes, Joe, I've been kicking this bag for 2 years, and it hasn't ripped yet. And Frazier goes, come on, man. He goes, you're going to rip the bag. And Tex says, Joe, if I rip it, I'll pay for it and replace it. And with that, Frazier walked up to his office, Cobb threw 2 more kicks, and then walked over and joined me and Charles.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they got along, Tex and Joe, I would hope.
Right. But when he said, Joe, I've been kicking this for 2 years and it hasn't ripped, Frazier didn't know what to say.
Yeah, well, he said he was going to pay. He would have made good on it, right, Tex, had he ripped it?
Frazier got a kick out of Cobb, and they had some funny conversations at different times. But that's one of the memories, and I've been posting them, Jack, because as you know, they may demolish that gym. And I'm not happy about that because I had a lot of fun, made some friends, learned a lot, and have some great memories of some things that happened in that gym.
Yeah, we're going to have to go, but let me just close. Michael Spinks said Joe Frazier's gym was his second home. He loved it there. It was like a second home to him. Okay?
You told me that last week, Jack. You know what? I really like that because that made me feel that what I was feeling and going through at that time, it just had that feel. And Michael Spinks lived there for a while, late 70s, early 80s, with his 78 silver anniversary Corvette.
Okay, Frank, a lot of fun. Next week, we'll fully analyze the Fury-Usyk fight, and we're going to go out on the limb with predictions, unlike your friends who like to give their predictions after the fight's over. But see you next week.
But we don't do that.
No, we don't do that. See you next week.
Thanks for watching, everybody.